Good afternoon. Today I'm going to. I had planned to speak on the gem economics in the cultural sphere. I keep gesturing the spheres on and about the gem files into today the AI readiness. However, in this last 2 weeks, with my engagement in the use of ChatGPT, I have also finding out how much with my daily engagement by posting an extended question. When I say extended question, is like everybody else. If you look back to history in some sectors or some segments of the history, we still know all this by bits and pieces, like a dusting bin. In my visualization of ChatGPT, before we talk about positive, negative, just focus on the research and digging into the search of the many past history. I had started 1974 to 76 creating a counseling psychological program called the three C's, and predominantly is the communication dynamics with the communication analytica. It's a format I engage my students or people who engage in the counseling program with me. And in the middle of it is the cultural sphere. In that particular turning point is the cultural sphere about education in higher education. Today, we can even make this into a educational logistics for the North American college program. Yes, we can even monetize it. But in that development, unbeknown to me, in the Analytica, where I have tried for years to create a language, not using any other language. Uh, Again, I have the fortunate, or what I have cultivated myself in the handling of five languages, from Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, English, and the three dialects in Chinese. But what I had developed, um, maybe subconsciously, from a psychological perspective or psychoanalytical, psychocultural perspective, I'm going back reflectively, thinking backward to find the solution, the problem with my students by adapting then in 74 what transactional analysis is the kind of evolution from the Freudian psychosexual pleasure principle, eventually evolving into the educational field in North America, and then more into the communication. So many people can be easily open your comments about Sigmund Freud, and he had picked on the issue of psychosexual dynamics and pleasure principle. Again, cross-culturally, he is Jewish uh, by origin, and he borrowed the Greek mythology with all the characters from Oedipus complex to Electra and the obsession between children and their parents, and then the various fixations. It was very clear. It was clear under the cultural sphere of then the Victorian era, representing the puritanicalism of the era, and people trying to breaking from the taboo. I have other references. Even real early, I had read a very sexual book written without an author, but in the same time and period of the Vienna era of Freud and then England. The book title is called My Secret Life. In fact, if any one of you want to Google and go into Amazon, that book electronically is free. And another exposure to the stories in my house. My father was a French graduate. So from the time I spent my 1952-62 in Macau, before the time of television. Radio, yes, but much of that is reading. The omnipresence of the book. Even in my sister's rooms, we have always that reference of a library. Many books in French, English, and also in Chinese. So I guess I was 14, 15. I remember the same book had followed us into the library in Brazil, where we emigrated 1962 when I was 14. And The Lady Charteris Lover is just one of those books in the period written by D.H. Lawrence. And also in that particular story was the struggle of the women's anxiety um, of her sexuality and with a husband who was wounded during the war. So he was basically sexually dysfunctional. I am not sure why I felt very comfortable reading of this level of anxiety. And subsequently, when I had gone into college in 1967, I had my major double in psychology and Spanish. So I'm just giving you a little background in the development of the three C's, and very much in my focus about the cultural spheres. And these cultural spheres, I hope, and I think it will be a positive contribution I have. And let me remind all of you, we all have this kind of exposure by using the terminology, or I depicted the use of the spheres, give me a lot of clarity because I am a product of cross-cultural exposure, cross-cultural living experience from my early first 5 years in Shanghai, raised by a wet nurse nanny speaking the language from Shanghai or nearby Suzhou, Hangzhou, upriver from Shanghai. And then my maternal language is Cantonese from my mother's side. So 52 to 62. And that is the language we use in our household, and very, very, very commonly. And the exposure to the schooling in English and with the Latin and Greek, singing Gregorian chants in the Roman Catholic school in Macau by the Salesians from Italy. And I'm forever grateful for the exposure with this, and my association with the Salesians. Even today, I have a very close linkage in my future schooling in Brazil. And in this whole development with the languages, exposing to the Latin and Greek base in Macau, baptized by the Roman Catholic Order of the Jesuits, and very known mission by the Italian priest, the Jesuit Matteo Ricci. And this continue on the development of the Otomota and also that particular emphasis on cross-cultural. Because in any given time in my household, be that in Brazil or even in Macau, one room where the aunts, my mother, and the friends are playing mahjong, speaking in Cantonese, and the other room where my father and his friends from Lebanon, for his friends from Burma or from Thailand, who all jointly gone to Brazil, developed business in Brazil, and they share the language acquired at the Sorbonne in Paris. And Portuguese amongst the youngsters mix in with the English, with the ethnic group, eventually more immigrant coming from Taiwan. That we have the Cantonese, we have the Taiwan Mandarin, and we also have another pocket of the Chinese ethnic from Shanghai, from Wenzhou in the province of Zhejiang. So this cross-cultural exposure had allowed me to create this cultural sphere, because either you understand the language, you joined in, you want to stay away. Also, in that period of time, growing up in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in our neighborhood, which is called the Zona Sul, the many international people, immigrants, and one in particular, I swam for the club called Hebraica, meaning Hebrew, a Jewish club. I was invited to become a competitive swimmer, and I did break the record in Brazil in 64 50-meter breaststroke. And in that particular enclave, that's even more diverse. He was also at a time when my best friend Yvonne Smook is from Hungary, who's the one who took me into the club, invited me to compete, took my timing. Eventually, I basically outcompeted his pose on the style of the breaststroke. But anyway, in any one of the sets of circumstances, a table, an open dining snack bars, restaurants, and by the pool and by the tennis courts and all the other facilities, you can be a pocket of ladies speaking Hungarian, in the case of Ivan Smuk, and then another group speaking German, and many were speaking English. And also at that particular time, I can sing the full hymn of Avanakila, when there was a time when the Israelis from the kibbutz coming in from Israel, raising money in Brazil. I actually danced and sang Avanakila with the young lady by name of Yahya Dayan, who happened, later on I find out, was the daughter of Moshe Dayan, a Sabra, a native-born Israeli. Also in that time and point, during the various Israeli or Jewish Olympics called Maccabea, I had swam against Mark Spitz without knowing who he was, but he's an excellent swimmer. And when he dove in for the 400 medley, he's already taking 7 body length, outperforming to any other butterflies at that time. In this cross-cultural zone, when we were invited to a party, many of my friends happened to be Lebanese, and again, because we're very Roman Catholic, the Christian Catholics for most of the Lebanese, and my father's friends. There is another cultural group, extremely hospitable. I still missing my cold salad with eggplants and the fruit dates and coffee and cookies and whatnot. So the exposure of this international arena with the Chinese young friends of mine playing basketball together for one group. Some of them go to school in the British graded school in Morumbi, and the other ones were the Roman Catholic school called the Chapel School in the Jacques Laflora in a region called Santo Amaro. This collective cross-cultural experience from zone to zone, from Shanghai to Macau, from Macau to Sao Paulo, boom, with the rest of the global community. I have dated young ladies who with American descent, and also Elizabeth from Denmark. But what I'm trying to say in this particular segment, and now all these pieces are forming from my creation of the counseling program called 3C, with core value in the center, the emphasis on cultural sphere. And I think, and I hope in the future, this can become a venture between many universities and many colleges. But the outbirth even bigger than the 3 C's and more than the psychology of round and square, a language I have subconsciously created, because the very origin of the Chinese culture is about the sky, 10, and then ground, D. And then if you look at the Tai Chi, it's the black representing the dark and the white representing the brightness or sky or the earth. But in each one, there was a dot of the opposite. So the Tai Chi, the yin and yang, the dualistic of the Chinese, actually Chinese lettering It's very, very basic. Even you can tie into a little bit of the primitivity and activism. The Chinese once written on a horizontal stroke. The Chinese number two is the same stroke but broken into two. Okay. And so that is a two. And you may even look at that. This formation is the female genitalia, and the one is the male genitalia. So you put it in between. And from a Chinese oral speaking, one created the two, and two create the three. And this two and one create all things in the universe. With all this, from 1962 almost until 1973, after I graduated from college, undergraduate, and maybe in that particular time and year when China was recognized by the United Nations, this particular reflection, never an identity crisis, thanks to comment on my language, be that in the U.S., be that in Brazil, have always interacted, played from sports, swimming, 4 year soccer for the college, and then eventually even travel the pro team for the first time when I got paid $50 by the Madison, Wisconsin's 56ers. And I remember my coach and teacher, who's an Englishman, Tony Davis, told me, Paul, now you are a semi-pro because you got money. But at any rate, the clusters and the stages of multiculturalism, cross-cultural exposure, and the languages had allowed me and Kathy, my wife, partner, spouse, also got her master's in communications. When we opened our business in 1977, in the same year, we have decided to cultivate a nonprofit institute called CCI, Cross Cultural Institute, without any particular finality, but knowing very well if we do well in our business, we can afford to give, to donate, which we do quite often, even today, by sharing with the community and donating for donations and whatnot. So the CCI, the Cross Cultural Institute, was also formed and shaped, again, bits and pieces. And so 5 years ago, I shared with my wife's spouse, partner, and said, I want to get back to find integration in what I have acquired before 1976 and what I have accumulated over this past few years. And one event very most memorable is when I had gone to the northernmost part of Brazil, the town called São Gabriel de Cachoeira, in the upper region of the Rio Negro. The Rio Negro means Black River, and the reason the river is black is the tremendous amount of the acidity with the trees falling off, coming down to the water and spoil the acidity. And basically, in Rio Negro, you can hardly find any mosquitoes. On the other hand, in the Solimones coming down from the Peru, and 1 degree warmer, then you have a lot more of the other disease and illness involving the mosquito, malaria. But Rio Negro, where I made up with one of my old friends from the city of Lorena, where I went to finishing my junior high school in Brazil. His name is Song, S-O-N-G, Dong Songi, who had become the bishop of the natives, the bishop in Portuguese, the Bispo dos Índios. And he was just discovered that he had Parkinson's. I was told by my old teacher, Padre Mario Bonatti from Lorena, and I turned 60 in 2008, and I have decided to take a 6-week retreat. Again, thinking, reflecting, what could I have done Amongst them, there's 8 priests covering the entire river villages of the natives, 30 different ethnic groups. I just mentioned a couple of names I can recall. The Tucano, which they share with the Colombian and Venezuela by the upper river, then with the Bare, Baniva, and a little further north is the Yanomamis. And in all these villages, and Bishop Song was in a parish by the same name of the city, San Gabriel de Cachoeira. We have met up. We talk about old times. We came from a very similar ethnic origin. He's from Shanghai, and I was also born in Shanghai. After 48, the family moved into Hong Kong, but his family's already been generations of Roman Catholics. And then I went to Macau. We both attended Salesian schools. He had gone further in Hong Kong than when we met up in Lorena, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Lorena is a city located on the valley called Valley de Paraíba. It's halfway point between Rio de Janeiro from the east, in the northeast, and then southwest to the city of Sao Paulo, which is on a plateau. We met up. We have spoken. I had my interest to join the Salesian Order in 1965, and somehow my mother had not allowed my pick of schooling because I was absolutely in love with Brazil, with the people, the culture, the language, plus the curiosity of the ethnic groups like the Salesians were already involving in the state called Mato Grosso in the west, and the engagement with the tribal natives called the Chavantes. But anyway, our meeting up in San Gabriel, and in the sharing in that particular 6 weeks, Padre Capianchi, Osvaldo Capianchi, and I share much by his orientation, more reading, more videos of Paulo Freire, which I was already acquainted with the conscientization, and also more of the footages of Paulo Freire and the best Brazilian cultural anthropologist, Darcy Ribeiro. So that exposure at 2008, of course, everybody remember the crisis, which had also set us back a little bit, not damaging, but the original plan to be something more striking into the industry and the organization of the industry between Brazil, China, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Sri Lanka, South Korea, Japan, with me hubbing in the core center in Hong Kong. But that's another story. But that also had pushed further my desire in thinking of a universal language. One of the quote unquote regional lingua franca, well, let's get acquainted. English, it became the lingua franca of the world because the dominance of the English conquest, their colonialism, India, China, to be highlighted with opium, and then the American follow through. So we are speaking English. Everybody, after the war, every country almost damaged, and all the Chinese, most of the Chinese had, for those who can afford it, trying to find a way to get education in North America. This is the same sequence. I follow my 2 sisters and plus family, friends, cousins who have gone to Cornell, who have gone to Columbia, New York, and in that part of the world. But at any rate, this particular time in point, when I've been thinking that universal language, which I have tested my 3 C's in San Gabriel in a very mild manner by using the round, is you and I, we get along as well. By square, when I am having question mark, or we all use it when I'm questioning what you present, what you're saying, for as long as the square not turning sideways to become a triangle, which has become the spear, the finger pointing and whatnot, I developed this dynamics with the color intensity of in these shapes. Well, until recently, until I created the PRS, the psychology of round and square. Now I can see the 100% functionality in what I was planning, expecting some 30 years ago. And part of this development of the psychology of round and square is also complementary after 2008, because in the back of my mind, I read about Paulo Freire and his work, because what he described, the number of the Brazilian illiterates in his region in Northeast and Pernambuco and in Nordeste, we call it very poor. In fact, all the favela, the shanty towns in Rio, that if you are aware of such town, like the movie like Cidade de Deus and all that, most of the migrants coming down from the Northeast. Unfortunately, almost unfortunately, there was no planning for this massive migrant coming up from the dryland, the deserts in the Northeast into the urban area. And Rio, at one time, before they moved the capital city into Brasilia, Rio is one of the first of all, most gorgeous city with all the marvelous sights, viewing from Corcovado to the bays, to Guanabara Bay, to the area. Today we know about Ipanema, Leblon, and the different zones. And I have seen the beautiful sights from Hong Kong, but Rio was just stunning. So it was a metropolitan area, favored to all the elites, all the ruling class, and then the Brazilian capital before Brazil was created. But this entire idea about the language and about being able to use the psychology round and square into the area by eliminating the rigor to teach psychology. Here comes another obstacle to make things more simplified. Imagine we have to already translating the German-speaking Austrian Sigmund Freud and most of the psychologists with the German origin into English, and from English into Portuguese, and from Portuguese now we can pass on to the natives. I have found always with that practicality of my mindset, with my grasp more about the round and square, the cultural sphere in me, the psychology round and square was created. And yes, it is ready to be used to promote or to share, to do future workshops and seminars. The reason of that also, what triggered in the back of my mind when I reading the history of Paulo Freire, with his early success in Brazil with the people from Nordeste, and then he went to the city, the urban area of São Paulo, Rio, along the way with his colleagues, including the quote unquote, maybe at a time with much controversy in the Brazilian internal politics of the theologians, liberation theologians of the Boff brothers in Rio. But what I was reading, that why Paulo Freire was feeling very accomplished, or finding a tool that can be passing on to the poor, and by fostering his education about conscientization. Paulo Freire was also, during his exile, were invited, first exile to Chile, and then eventually went to Switzerland. He gave a couple lectures here in the U.S., but for what duration, I do not know. But what I have come to a certain obstacles he may have had. He went into Portuguese Africa. I'm not sure it's Cabo Verde or somewhere in West Africa. His idea and concept did not seem to have jiving with the local community educational field. And this is part of the reason where the psychology round and square, okay, that is a part what shaped and formed in my creation of the psychology round and square. Another cultural aspect that contributed to the psychology round and square was basically I have taken on the Zen Buddhistic value right around 400 BC or even earlier, before the real entry of the Buddhistic scriptures carried by this Tang monk on the 6th century or 7th century. But at any rate, by not using any written languages, at that time in China, by the entry of for the monk coming in from India, or called Damo, um, who went to Goshan, the mountain where the Shaolin temple was. By the sixth patriarch, or the descendant from that line, was once a illiterate from Guangdong. This goes to another coincidence where I'm half Cantonese from my mother's side. The sixth patriarch deliberately not to use any written forms. He himself started as an illiterate. But when he was teaching the dialectic form of education of the Buddhistic value transmitted by him, have established that the Zen teaching would not require any written words. And look how dynamic already 400 AD. And in a very similar idea, I maybe subconsciously, I borrowed that from. I can see the psychology round and square inspired by Paulo Freire's conscientization with another step into back to the Chinese, the conscience education by Wang Yangming, Xingshi, or the education of the heart, or the study of the heart, where I, with total audacity, I had renamed it as conscientology, or the study of conscience. And because Wang has another dynamic creation where he had managed to make the confluences of the 500 BC and the 4th century before Christ with the teaching of Confucius, teaching of Lao Tzu, of Tao, DAO or TAO, and then also with the teaching of Buddha. And let's be very mindful. Everybody's talking about Confucius like there's no like having a hearsay every day. But the teaching of Confucius, if all three disciplines were never religion. Number one, there's one huge mistake by using the term ism, like in the West, we talk about Judaism, Roman Catholicism, the Protestantism, and the Islamism. The West scholars, academics, had also labeled the three disciplines almost by making them similar to the religious system and value of the West. There's nothing wrong. We can all be ignorant to some degree, and then once we know it, we can change it. That will be much better. But this entire three system is always advocating about conscience. And the conscience in Chinese is written by two words. Liang Xin in Mandarin, Leung Sam in Cantonese. Liang is kindness. Xin is the heart. And this is ever since I was a child. And all the adults, and always trying to remind us, be a good boy, be a good person. Always be mindful that you have to cultivate or have a good heart. And this good heart conscience have much richer reinforced by a simple Walt Disney character. We all watch cartoons. The entire world was watching American Hollywood. We know Moses was Charlton Heston. Same thing was the Ben-Hur. So Jimmy the Cricket from the Italian novel of Pinocchio, and Jimmy the Cricket of the man, the ambassador of conscience, become part of the more imprinting figure. So what I'm trying to get here is that, fortunately or unfortunately, and something I hope my Western academia, my Western teachers, professors, and think, reflecting back the importance of thinking. Conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is the deep process of the human thinking, forward, backward, future. Reflective thinking, we're reflecting back. Why did we have all this goddamn wars? Introspection. Did I create any harm, or did any one of our collectives, the nation, what have I done to contribute to this conflict? Now, whatsoever. It's a self-examination. Well, that linked to the Greek era of the talking about, a life is, when it's not well examined, it's not worth living. So thinking future is the imagination. Look at the creation of the world, the invention, what we are into now with AI. What is the speediest, in a quantitative way? We talk about quantum tabulation, quantum arithmetic, quantum. So what conscience, I have started to search for this particular passage. And by the way, this is my initiative. It doesn't have to be me alone, and I invite the world to do the same. And that's why in my exchange with ChatGPT, it's become almost like a daily consultation. What do you think? I have this 1, 2, 3, 4 puzzle. Can we tie together? And so, with even Paulo Freire's, the only one Western thinker, philosopher, teacher, had used the word to conscientize into a verb, the conscientization in Portuguese, a conscientização. And by this one word, almost like a Zen effect, one word Zen took me back to Wang Yangming. And it just so happened Wang Yangming happens to be from my father's village. How can I forget? 1500. But the 1500 marks another correlation that I hope my Western friends to reflect upon. The Western global conquest, domination, wars, colonization, enslavement, to take the global commodities with the abuse of the sugar. I'm a diabetic too, so I remind other people, wow, great sugar, not to forget tobacco. And the most damaging of it all, that had created 100 years of humiliation to the Chinese, where the British outspent their silver drinking tea. Well, they can even blame one of the Portuguese noble, Catarina de Bragança, married to the king at the time, and taught the English how to have table manners and how to drink tea. And then with the tea, in the afternoon tea, the late breakfast tea, the cookies and whatnot, the Portuguese literally had introduced the tea drinking habit. If you want to call it a vice, I'm not object to it. And because the tea drinking, the British had exhausted all their silver. And in order to gain back the silver, the tea they sold to China, very quickly, eventually, why the American hiding behind the China trade had brought in also the opium trade into China, why the one Jewish family from Iraq, the Sassoons, and then eventually facilitated by the Rothschilds with their money, the banking influence, enriched also by the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. Eventually, they become in-laws. But in between that time, the Rothschilds were under extremely influential for the British war entity, naval entity called the East India Company. In the 1600s, they already dominated India, colonized India. And come to 1800s, by 1840, the opium had also conquered China, at least from the coastal regions, with the shame that we had made concession to the ceding the island of Hong Kong, so the English can anchor their ships, and then the forced treaty, eventually 100 years leasing of the territory in the peninsula called Kowloon. But all this, what I'm talking about, the West was on a clear sailing with not only the military power. The military power was reinforced by the creation of the steam engine. And what the British have fought the Chinese is basically using already the hot gear, cannonballs, guns, muskets, and fighting Chinese with the still basically using arms and shields and whatnot. That there was no battle. So the Opium War had created a very strong psychological trauma. And by me quoting, not wanting but borrowing from the diaspora and also the Holocaust, is both. But the collective term should be called the cultural dissonance. How this hardship, how this war and chaos and trouble continue until 1840 until 1948, when China was first time formed and shaped. And in between that time of the decline of the Manchus and the chaos period of the rising of the Chinese Republic and the wars among the Chinese inland warlords and the dispute of the humiliation furthered by the Versailles Treaty, where the Chinese was part of the Victoria team but was never accepted in the European club. So when the Versailles Treaty came along, the Europeans together had rewarded the German possession of Shandong, the city called Qingdao, to the Japanese. So directly, indirectly, we can talk about the European already basically giving the green light slightly to strengthen Japan, to take over Manchuria, for whatsoever reasons. Eventually, Japan claimed that they invaded China because they want to make path to fight Russia with the endorsement for Adolf Hitler. But the chaotic time and with the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, with the Chinese ambassador from Shanghai refused to sign and got up and left. And that had created the rise of the May 4th movement in Beijing by the students, by the workers, by all other Chinese who were feeling nationalistic, totally opposed the outcome of the Versailles Treaty and the cessation of the port of the city of Qingdao to the Japanese. And then the May 4th came, and then the Japanese invasion, and then also at the same time the split of the two parties between the KMT, the Nationalist Chinese, and the Communist Party by Mao Zedong. So with my search called Pedagogy of Conscience, in my personal attempt trying to articulate when and where the Chinese have this language called Liangxing, or conscience. So I'm still on this passage. But however, I think with this traveling passage, and I will be able to find echoes and response, sharing, or even be critical with this development. But the general outcome, if the West can try to recognize by the Western expansionism and colonization with a little bit of that arrogance, because the two following industrial revolution were all favor to the Anglo-American, if you bring in the money together, the Judaic world. Other than the English steam engine had allowed them to crushing the entire Asia region, the invention eventually coming out in the use of petroleum in the whole aggregate, the electricity, and then the rail system, and then the development of America, adding to the power of the American. And after the Second War, that power of the Americans had sent all the nations in the world shipping their gold into America for safeguarding. And coming to a modern era, the third industrial revolution is the CIA tool of the use of the internet, popularized to be used by academia, by research, and by the software programming, and then the IT development, to now quickly jumping into the AI at present. So the last three changes, evolutions or revolutions, had enriched, empowered the Anglo-American Judaic when it comes to money. Put the three together. At the present, the AI is no longer a territorial matter. The intelligence of man, the aggregating intelligence, and the use of intelligence is everywhere. The American powerhouse created the internet, where Google, where is the European Google? But on the other hand, the search engines in China, created by different groups and entities, and the rise of Huawei is another contention to the powers in the West. I'm not saying this with any malice or ill wishes to anyone of the development in our hands today, but I do like to remind the West, the rise of the economic power of the Chinese, plus in what we talk about conscience, can be a part of the Asian or the Chinese, the Renaissance, that more can think back what kind of power we have among us. And none of this power in the use of human conscience is ever about territorial. The Chinese territory was amplified when China were under the two ethnic groups that were before they even become Chinese. One is by the Mongols, the other one is by the Manchus. The entire region of the territory in Xinjiang and the Outer Mongolia were all under the rules of the Manchu dynasty. And here there's bits and pieces. Again, I heard people talk about, wow, China losing the Outer Mongolia territory to the Russians. And that was during the time of the dispute of the KMT, the nationalist Chinese government, with the son of Chiang Kai-shek, Zhang Jingguo, and then the further north in the northeast by Harbin, by the territory Vladivostok. But I want to remind my Chinese audience, in my cross-cultural study, which I'm just on this passage this afternoon, remember well that the Manchu rulers, in their way aiming to take the Han Chinese land and wealth and territory, the Manchus did not have a written language. So they have tried for a long period of time to make marriages, to interface their culture with the other nomadic group, which are the Mongols. So they have developed their Manchu language, which they had used eventually to separate their court system. Chinese call the civil service on the left hand, and then the muscles on the right hand. So for the longest time, their control of the empire is only used, the generals, the military commanders, all have the fluency in both Manchu and Han Chinese, plus Mongolian, which was still very much in use in part of the empire by the Manchus. On the other hand, I have just discovered that over time, Genghis Khan in the 12th, 13th century had adopted Buddhism by way of the Tibetans. The Tibetans were going through a phase of their shaman, their many ritualistic, fighting in the mountains of the demons, and they have the more of a shaman-like religion until they have grasp of the incoming teaching of the Buddhistic values. So Genghis Khan is one of the early Mongolians have adapted the Buddhism from Tibet, which another measure had basically taming the Mongols or become more civilized. And because of that interaction, they developed the written language. So I think in all my talking about the bits and pieces, while I'm highlighting this interaction between the Manchus and the Mongols, and I want to remind many of us may feel nationalistic that we lost Outer Mongolia in terms of a territory. But in the binding between the Russians, in that strong characteristic shown in the dynasties of the Mongolians and their interaction and the intermarriages into the Rusk, into the Russian ethnicity, many of the descendants from the Tsar lineage were literally the legitimate owners of the vast territory, even during the Manchu Empire and their wars. The Manchu had taken, the Qing rulers had taken a huge portion of the Mongolian territory, and because of certain kind of falling out of favor with I believe it's Qinglong, a group of the Mongolians, and their not so friendly atmosphere with the Manchu court, they were never syncretized. I mean, they were never given the training, the skill to learn the Han language. So both linguistically and territorially, they got more disassociation with the Mongolians from the Inner Mongolia, and the closer proximity and the interaction between the Han Chinese, the Manchus, and the Mongolian. All of this is what I'm trying to do, to try to understand where and how can we be fostering the education of human conscience. It doesn't have to be the Chinese, but one of the most consistent, if in 3,300 years since the writing of the Chinese, starting with the Shang Dynasty, our Chinese culture, the entire focus is about the cultivation, about human, the language of the heart. And there's a double benefit. You cannot be kind unless you are good. So goodness and kindness is the double benefit. And I got part of that from my childhood, oral language by my aunts, by my family, and very much inspired by Monkey King. For me, he is the king of conscience. Powerful, righteous, hot temper, smash and kill when they found a demon, totally against his master, the tame, quiet, docile, almost a useless monk. So with this search of my passage to create the teaching of the pedagogy, the mechanism of conscience, all these bits and pieces of cultural exposure in the sharing and the living experience with my beloved Brazil. Even in 62, the first thing I remember well, the two Portuguese words used in almost by every Brazilian, regardless our status, being more affluent or opulent, to our servant maids, whomever, to the farmhands. The word used daily is we talk about amor humano, human, well, calor humano. I already transferred it to amor humano, human love, human care, without conditions. This kind of without conditions had also allowed me to embrace one of the best American psychologists with another impact in my life is Carl Rogers. And his therapy is very simple: unconditional positive regards. No matter who this person coming into my room to starting our engagement with the treatment counseling sessions, unconditional positive regards. So we in life we have a choice to pick the good, the bad, and yes, even the ugly. Sounded like a Clint Eastwood's movie. And I hope in this passage, in this direction, I'm heading into developing the pedagogy of conscience is a is a, basically help me awaken first the awareness of conscience education and conscience awareness. And I just have discovered since 1500, since the conquest of the world by the Iberian two groups, Portuguese and Spanish, and then eventually added the Dutch, added the English, with English predominantly dominated the world, with the Union Jack flies everywhere. And the US had received that part of the empire and territorial expansion after the Second World War, when the rest of the world was basically damaged. But I hope that we can reflect and think, and not to use the Freudian projection, the tendency for the American to do that, to demonize China and whatnot, is I will summarize in these four basic policies. In most of these policies have not really worked, but it is a military, ballistic, warring policy. The number one that we all suffered in Latin America is called the American emphasis about the dominance of Latin America by the Monroe Doctrine. It started the first Banana Republic in 1954 by the military coup in Guatemala, because the company owned by the United Fruit Company facing the challenge of a price hike for the workers who were making 50 cents a day. The United Fruit Company, and also extracting from the ChatGPT, have two of the board of directors, those in what I call the evil twins of the Dulles brothers. One had created the CIA agency, the other one was in the State Department. And they both illegally, from today's standard, were on the board of the United Fruit Company. If you want to dare to think of the speech of Eisenhower, to think about the fate of Kennedy, if these merchants have their influence with the domestic policy of one nation, and one by one, the Monroe Doctrine were forcing military change, regime changes by military power, by the influence and the corruption of the Latin American leaders in corruption. What many of us was reflecting at that time is that why American practicing their own democracy in the US, they have created chaos and mass murders from countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Peru, and the 1973 coup in Chile, removing Allende, and the military regimes in Argentina, Brazil, 64. The Monroe Doctrine, even at today's rate and ratio, with the US $35 trillion debt, is no longer sustainable. And the second, which is very bizarre, is the idea of the zero-sum game, meaning if US is not number one, everyone comes to that post or nearby is an enemy. The number three dangerous idea is the American exceptionalism. And finally, the fourth, in the last rounds, in the last 10, 15 years, with all the color revolutions, or so-called the the neoliberal ideas continue to foster or force upon the American way of democracy onto other nations and failed, including the absolute failures in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I am saying so from my passage in search of the pedagogy of conscience. And I hope my friends and my audience here can share this view and reflect on your own, thinking on your own. And we need all the more to reshape a world that can be engaged with peace and harmony. And I think being good and being kind will never allow any nation to go astray, to want to dominate, to want to take off the natural resource of people and to enslave others. And I'm absolutely in favor of the Silk Road rebuilt under the directives of Xi Jinping. And I wish all to find peace amongst us and do our best not to provoke any wider conflicts in and around our world. That's why I'm backing my own research onto the pedagogy of conscience. Thank you.